morning, Ambassador. Good morning, Marianne, Péron-Doise. Good morning, Théo, Clément. So I'm very happy to chair this roundtable session dedicated to Joe Biden, the new US administration and alliances in Northeast Asia, with perspectives from both Japan and the Korean Peninsula. So this session will last 2 hours. The first hour will be dedicated to 3 presentations. First, Ambassador Takamizawa will present the perspective from Japan. Then Marianne Péron-Doise will present from Paris the perspective from Japan and South Korea. And Théo Clément, who is currently in Mauritania, will present the perspective from North Korea. So I'm very happy to host this roundtable. And first of all, let me tell you a few words about the current situation about US alliances and the end of the Trump era. This is obviously a burning issue that everyone from both sides of the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean have a look at. Obviously, if we assess the Trump administration, we can say that the US is not considered anymore by its main allies and partners as a reliable ally in a context of renewed great power competition with Russia and China. And interestingly enough, many American observers are particularly aware that the US cannot engage alone in Asia anymore. It needs to renew its partnership. And also, as Walter Wilson underlines last week, it needs the support of its European allies to engage further in Asia and in the Indo-Pacific region. So we have to bear in mind that this new renewed engagement of the US in the Asia-Pacific region cannot work or cannot be done without taking into account and bearing in mind that the Biden administration US foreign policy agenda will first depend on domestic renewal. And I'm sure that we are particularly aware of that. And despite the very interesting profession de foi, as we would say in French, or agenda that the head of the Pentagon to be, Michel Flournoy, presented in the first place in late December. So the question is for us, and the main issue challenge for the Biden administration is certainly, will it be able to offer more resilient alliances, both for transatlantic and Pacific partners? Many comparisons may be drawn between the US transatlantic network of alliances and the trans-Pacific alliances. Also, both European and Asian partners have in mind the issues at stake in the Indo-Pacific region in particular, and we do have in mind those issues well. So, of course, democratic treaty allies in Asia generally don't shirk their military burdens in the way European states often do, but the Biden administration should still look for some early wins in the Pacific. We may mention agreements on subsidies for US military bases in Japan and South Korea, and this would be certainly a good place to start. The Biden administration should also stress that deteriorating relations between both countries are not helpful when it comes to justifying the US presence in Northeast Asia, and I'm sure that our speaker will certainly emphasize and put the emphasis on that particular point. So the initiative of the Biden administration to come, both in Europe and Asia, should be part of a broader Biden administration effort to try to Trump-proof its entire alliance network. And certainly we may hear from Paris put the emphasis on the fact that the system has nonetheless survived to some extent, because at the end of these past 4 years, we have to bear in mind that the importance of institutionalized ties between ministries and departments worldwide. What I'm trying to say is that even though Trump threatened and abandoned US allies, US military and civilian officials continue to cooperate with their counterparts overseas. And these professional networks made it difficult for Trump to quickly end US security commitments and likely save many other agreements as well. So the idea is that the renewal of alliances is certainly possible because of these strong ties that were maintained despite the Trump administration, I would say. So as part of this broadened plan, the US needs to reinforce intergovernmental relationships, especially with European allies, but also with Asian ones. Obviously, we have in mind NATO, Germany and France in particular, who are taking the lead in this process and are trying to offer reinvigorate transatlantic relationships with the support of the head of the Department of State to be, Tony Blinken, who is coming to Europe very soon. So obviously the US and its European allies will have to make a point of holding increasingly frequent joint military exercises in air policing patrols, involving more personnel and equipment, and keeping in mind also military headquarters in a certain number of regions in Europe. We have in mind Central and Eastern Europe in particular. And this will help certainly to strengthen the relation between the US and its European partners. The same thing in the Indo-Pacific. The Biden administration will certainly have to push for more multilateral joint military exercises with regional allies, with an eye toward building stronger military and diplomatic relationships, akin to those that exist in Europe, I would say. And on this particular front, we have in mind that Trump largely left Australia to fend for itself when it came to China. And now Biden have to push for Canberra to play an important role in Trump-proofing, I would say, Asian alliances, and for the governing Liberal National Coalition to tackle its own right populist strike, which is a concern in the region. So to conclude on that point, obviously Australia, along with US allies such as Japan and South Korea, will likely support greater cooperation immediately. And these efforts can provide a basis for expanding strategic engagement with India as well, because that was one of the first moves of the Biden administration to come, and also other players currently outside the US alliance system. So finally, that's very interesting that the first trip overseas that the Biden administration has, that is in the Biden administration agenda, is a trip to Brussels for an unprecedented joint EU-NATO summit in the spring. And this would be followed, interestingly enough, by a second trip to Tokyo in the fall for a meeting with democratic Asian allies. And finally, this would lead to a joint summit with both European and Pacific partners in 2022. So obviously, we understand that we have common interests, both European and Asian partners, when considering our ties and alliance with the US giants. So until now, and with the Trump administration, the US has preferred to maintain distance between its two sets of allies, both transatlantic and trans-Pacific allies. But now, if we take into account economic integration, global security challenges, and common membership, it seems that such an approach, the Trump approach, is obsolete, and I would say it's totally irrelevant if we take into account the current context. So this is the broad and general picture just to introduce this roundtable, but I don't want to be too long, and it's 10 minutes. And now I'm very happy to leave the floor to Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Permanent Representative of Japan to the Conference on Disarmament, Ambassador Takamizawa, who has been also among his different charges, head of the National Institutes for Defense Studies, the NIDS, with which IRSEM has a very strong partnership, and we are particularly happy to have you and to listen to you today. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours now, and we will come back to you for questions at the end of this roundtable session. Many thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, and I'm very happy to participate in this library discussion. And I think you refer to the NIDS, NIDS, National Institute for Defense Studies. This is really our favorite word. And NIDS stands for Network, Initiative, Diversity, and Sustainability. These 4 words, which I really like, and I have implemented this motto in Geneva, and it turns out to be quite successful, but difficult to implement. But anyway, and first I like to talk about the change and continuity and consistency of US administration from 3 angles in the first place. First is the policy direction. Policy direction is composed of the substance and branding. So we have to take a close look at 2 aspects of the policy direction. And so if someone said something very new, but it tends to be a very revisit of the old agenda. So we have to be very careful about that. And second is a policy priority. As you talked about, moderator talked about, I think priority has shifted from administration to administration, domestic or international, or economy or security, and in regional terms, Middle East, Europe, or Asia Pacific. And third point is the process. I think style of business. This is really different. And in the Trump administration, Prime Minister Abe worked very hard to deal with the change of style. And I believe that Prime Minister has been pretty successful in adjusting the change of the style. But if we look at the reality, the substance of the policy direction towards Asia during the Trump administration, I would say I see a lot of continuity and consistency, although the style is very exceptional and very difficult to deal with. But that's my observation. And so if we look for the future, how we define the power relationship within the administration, President, White House, and the Congress, and the state and defense, and so forth. So this power relationship has changed greatly from administration to administration. So I'm not really sure what kind of development will be seen in coming months. But one good thing is that Catherine Hicks, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, she is really a good strategist, and we have worked with her for many years on strategy issues. So I hope if that's the case, that we will see some continuity in policy direction. But I would say what is more important is the French perspective, Japanese perspective. So we have to come up with our own agenda and to make a creative input to the new coming administration. What is the priority and what you should be doing, what we are doing for you and for us. So that's a kind of very important point. And then I like to talk about the security policy development in Japan for the past several years, particularly after Prime Minister Abe took office in 2020. And there are many, I think, changes. First, what is really important is the formulation of the first national security strategy. It was formulated in 2013, and this is the basis of many policy initiatives, including establishment of new National Security Council, as well as National Security Secretariat. And second, new guidelines for defense equipment and technology transfer and cooperation. I think that's a basis of the broader cooperation. And third, unitary and specified secret protection law and strengthening intelligence cooperation. I think after the introduction of this law, Japan has expanded intelligence cooperation with many countries, including France. And number four, introduction of peace and security legislation, which covers long overdue homework. And what is really significant is that in peacetime, Japanese defense forces can protect the allied vessels or partners vessels if needed for peaceful purposes and just for protection. So this is really a significant change. Probably French people will not understand why, but this is a reality. Our Japanese constitution has a lot of restraints, self-imposed restraints, but the situation has changed greatly. So now Japan has adjusted to the new situations. And number 5 is the strengthening effective and reliable dynamic joint defense force. That is the very new national defense program outline, but this is really a basis for a dynamic operation in the Asia-Pacific region. So SDF activities has expanded and strengthened to cooperate with partners in the region, including France. And France is an Asia-Pacific resident power. And I have been, I have been visited by French commander who I think is working and conducting its duty in the Asia-Pacific region. So that is a very important area. And so, if I can change the subject, but just focusing on the military activities and operation is not good enough. So our strategy has 6 approaches to the regional stability. And first is the strengthen own capacity, French power and Japanese power, such as the things. So we need to define our role in international security. That's the first point. And second is the Japan-US alliance. This is really an important pillar, and Japan is hosting huge, if I may say, huge forces, US forces in Japan. And third is the promoting the diplomatic and security cooperation with partners. This is a very important concept in the national security strategy, and which has evolved into the free and open in the Pacific. This is an important point. And fourth is the actively contribute to the international cooperation for peace and stability through various fora. But this area, to be frank, Japan has not been actively working hard because the current international situation forces Japan to focus on much more local and regional issues. So this is the reality, and resource allocation is increasingly challenging. That's a reality, but we certainly would like to focus on the international cooperation. And number 5, we are facing a lot of challenges, human security and human rights and climate change and global health coverage and so forth. National security strategy, I think, covers the issue of pandemic, but the current pandemic is evolving in a very different way. But certainly, traditionally and historically, how to deal with pandemic is really challenging. And these are, I think, approaches we have to work on. And also, domestic infrastructure is very important, and public support and public opinion is increasingly, I think, affected by the social media. So how to raise really good awareness of the issues is really important. And in case of France, I understand that nuclear deterrence education is a very, very important, I think, topic in France. And I have been surprised, I was really surprised how to see your textbook, how well, I think, equipped with this knowledge and something like that. But anyway, these are the approaches that our national security strategy has looked at. But in 2018, given the change of the international situation, speed, depth, and scope, that Japanese government introduced 2018 National Defense Program guidelines, which I think responding to the huge changes, what is happening in the world. Although our national security strategy was not revised at that time, but it will be overdue in a few years. And it is aimed at 10-year time frame. So we have to begin to work on the new strategy. If Prime Minister says yes to go, then we have to work on that. So we have only 2 or 3 years to go. So combined with the US policy direction and situation in Europe on a global scale, and also Asia Pacific region. So we have to work on that element. But we have very important principles to respect. And first is the exclusively defense-oriented policy. So issues related to active defense is under discussion, but this is not really, I think, developing as fast as some people would like to see. And also question of collective self-defense. This is still, I think, an important, point. And when we introduced this new security legal package, I was asked by a friend that has Japan removed the wall of collective self-defense? And it seemed that they just has given some room for maneuvering. So I said, yes, you're right. No, we are not, Japan is not removing the wall of collective self-defense, but we are still under the constitutional restraint. So that's a reality. But we have certainly adapted to the new changes, but still to go. I think that's where we are now. And second point is the nuclear principles, non-nuclear principles. As you know, that the TPNW ban treaty, nuclear weapons ban treaty, will be entry into force 22nd of January. And so that will certainly affect the Japanese public opinion, but will certainly depend upon the US extent nuclear deterrence. So this is an issue that we have to work on. To what extent nuclear extent deterrence is reliable, and what kind of measures are necessary, and how we can move toward the nuclear-free world, so nuclear weapon-free world. So this is the kind of basic point that we will be debating over the coming months. And in some areas in Japan, that why Japanese government not like to exceed the treaty, since it is entry into force. It's time for Japan and others to join. So this is not so easy, I think, topic, I think, for us to deal with. And third point is that not becoming a military power. This is still quite varied. And so resource allocation to the defense equipment has been limited and will be limited, although we have expanded budget allocation, but it's still not good enough. But it's really hard, I think, to dramatically increase our defense budget. So these are the reality. So that's why we need to promote the international cooperation, and including the cooperation with European partners and Asian partners and so forth. And so in a nutshell, Japanese defense policy is different from French policy, but we have a lot in common, and we can cooperate together to make the world more safe and safer and so forth. And then I'd like to talk about what is happening around Japan. I would like to talk about threats facing Japan. And so first, natural disaster is the most significant, I think, a threat to Japan. Earthquake, tsunami, and mega typhoon, and fires, and so forth. And volcano eruption is also a challenge. So we are, I think, filled with the natural disaster, I think, challenges. But if we talk about the country in the region, that you can see the difference of the order of the countries, which Japan has put emphasis on. Since the introduction of the first National Defense Program guidelines, NPDC, in 1978, the order of country has shifted from Soviet Union, Russia, to North Korea and China, and international global commons issues, maritime, outer space, and cyberspace issues. So, but currently, China is certainly doing a lot of difficult activities around Japan. And if I may call it gray zone challenges, China has conducted comprehensive, continuous capacity build-up, and they are really good at rule by law, not respect rule of law, but they rule by law. So they are really active in introducing new laws to affect the countries around China. So this is what is happening. And if I can talk about Senkaku issue, they engage in a unilateral cooperative attempts to alter the status quo based on their own assertion that incompatible with existing international law. This is a very evident one, and continuously expanding and intensifying its military activities at sea and in the air. And around Senkaku Islands, an inherent part of Japanese territory, they are doing many things for strategic reasons. And Chinese government vessels continuously violate Japanese territorial waters, and Chinese naval ships continuously operate in water around the islands, and expanding the military activities in the Pacific Ocean and the Sea of Japan, and frequently advance to the Pacific in an increasingly diverse navigation route. So this is really happening, and we are facing these challenges day by day, so 24 on a 7 basis. And it has expanded and increased, although the mass media coverage is going down, but that's reality. And also the integration among the different agencies have been strengthened. And it seems that they are really good at integrating various assets for the purpose of increasing their presence in this area. And Taiwan and the East China Sea and South China Sea are seamlessly related in their own strategic curricula. So this is a reality. And with regard to the free open in Pacific, I think we can cooperate very well. And 5 was very important: interaction, integration, initiative, implementation, and improvisation. So we have a lot of programs and projects underway. So, and we have taken a lot of initiative, but we need to integrate and we need to interact with each other, and we need to adjust to the new changes, sometimes improvise what is needed, and so forth. This is a kind of point that, with regard to the FOIP. And with regard to the US alliance, and I'd like to conclude soon, that 5 points are very important. A, assessment of changing global situation and crisis scenario, including limits of deterrence. I think that's first point. Second, B, beef up and fully utilize bilateral, trilateral, and international working mechanisms and relationships. So we have to go back to the very routine, constructive working relationship between US and allies and partners. Third, C, comprehensive and continuous consultation with allies partners. And I hope that US administration will at least tell something to the allies first. And D, diplomatic talks and regular open dialogue and revitalize multilateral fora. I think just to speak ill of the others in front of the international setting wouldn't work very well. But we really we support the substance. So let's focus on the substance. And finally, engagement with NGOs and network actors like us. So this is the point that I like to raise. So I probably spent too much on this issue, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks. Many thanks, Ambassador. Obviously, you tackle a certain number of issues that will help our next speakers, Marianne Péron-Doise and Thibaut Clément, to answer part of your questions, especially because hybrid warfare and gray zone challenges are particularly under scrutiny here at IRSEM. And also, obviously, the question of a free and open Indo-Pacific, the cooperation between allies, both European and American ones. So I'm sure that we will come back to those main issues during the Q&A session. But first of all, I would leave the floor, if I may, to my dear colleague Marianne Péron-Doise, who is a senior research fellow here at the Institute for Strategic Research. Her work focuses, as you know, on Asia security issues with a specific expertise on Northeast Asia and global maritime security topics as emerging naval forces and key maritime theaters. So obviously, Marianne Péron-Doise will certainly partly respond to some of the issues that you've raised in your presentation, Ambassador. She teaches also classes in maritime security at Sciences Po Paris currently, and she has occupied several senior positions on security issues in Asia Pacific in the French Ministry of Armed Forces, and notably head of Asia Pacific Department Delegation for Strategic Affairs from 2007 to 2011. So now, Marianne, the floor is yours, and we'll come back to your presentation during the Q&A session, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for your kind introduction. And let me tell you, and to tell all the attendants and my colleague panelists, how I'm glad to share this panel, and especially with the attendance of Ambassador Takamizawa and my good friend, Dr. Théo Clément, who is, in my view, one of the best French leading expert on North Korea, and we will see that in a few minutes. So my presentation, Madam Chair, is focused, of course, on South Korea policy, strategy, and the relation with US alliance, and of course, with a perspective regarding the incoming Biden administration, and maybe a fresh approach toward the Indo-Pacific, toward the strategic stability of Northeast Asia, and maybe towards the management, and especially the internal management of the alliance and the military cooperation between South Korea and US. So for that, I've prepared a couple of slides that I will be happy to share on my screen with you. And I am going to, to share my screen. Of course, I will, of course, trying to introduce my global approach regarding the topic we are analyzing today. In the contextualization on the topic of the South Korea defense policy, I try to review President Moon Jae-in last speech and address with regard to strategic issue, and I have selected the New Year address, but also a speech that the President made during the celebration of the Armed Forces Day, and of course all of the strategic documentation that is usually used, meaning the White Book of South Korea, the modernization of the armed force, reform defense 2.0 plan, which is a very ambitious plan of modernization and civilianization of the EHESS armed forces. And what the analysis of this document told us about the strategic thinking of EHESS is that, of course, and with no surprise for us as external observer, that South Korea and the current presidency and President Moon in administration is focusing on key points. Of course, these key points are recurring, are constant, and are a constant and essential parameter for the shaping of the South Korea strategic thinking. The inter-Korean politics and relation, the evolution of the Europe-US alliance, with, of course, many questions regarding the credibility of the alliance and the level of military commitment of US, and the question of trust within these two major allies. And there are a lot of comments regarding the recent evolution of the Republic of Korea defense posture and its strategic autonomy. And this notion of strategic autonomy is very important and is very, I will say, a priority for the President Moon with regard to the question. Oh, sorry, that's a miracle of the day. Thank you so much. And as you can see, regarding the examination of the sources and documentation that I revised for this presentation, of course, there is one domestic issue which is related to the expansion of the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course its impact on the defense and defense budget and the economic recovery of the country. And of course there are already some cuts in the defense budget projection for the year to come and for the modernization of the armed forces. And as I told you, the inter-Korean relations are at the center of the strategic thinking of the alliance, and of course in the mood of President Moon, perspective of a new dialogue with or between US and North Korea. The evolution of the Europe-US alliance is under scrutiny, as I said, regarding the security guarantee. And of course, there is a question of the transition to the operational control of the South Korean armed forces during wartime, and this operational control is actually in the hand of a US Army general, and the priority of the President Moon is the transfer into the hand of a South Korean general. So going to my next slide, if I may, yes. The defense posture of South Korea and the orientation of the Moon administration are shaping by the concept of middle power diplomacy of South Korea, and of course focus on the objective of peace and prosperity, not only for the country, but for the whole Korean peninsula, including, of course, the North Korea. And in this perspective, the national security strategy of South Korea is insisting on three major security objectives. Of course, a peaceful resolution of the North Korea nuclear and ballistic issue with the establishment of a peace regime over the Korean peninsula. And this is directly linked to the management of the dialogue between US and North Korea. Of course, the contribution to peace and prosperity in Northeast Asia and in the world, and for that South Korea has to develop and to modernize its armed forces and to develop some, I will say, cooperation with many other partners and to increase its security posture. We often read the term of reaching a robust security posture in all of the documents related to defense policy of South Korea. And of course, there is also the implementation of a cooperative diplomacy of South Korea in direction of Northeast Asia, but also a new Southern policy focusing on ASEAN and India. And this is really very important. when it came to the realization, the third point, the realization of society, protecting people's safety and life, this is clearly related to the conception of human security and all of non-traditional threats that can affect population of South Korea, meaning disaster, meaning the impact of climate change, or meaning the impact of the virus and pandemic as we are facing currently. Turning now to my next slide, if I may. Okay, just a quick word on the defense reform 2.0, which is a major objective of the current Moon administration, which is not new because it had been released in 2018, and the ambitions of this defense plan is to build, as you can read on my slide, a strong military that support peace and prosperity, and of course being more autonomous and being in situation to take initiative to be able to fight any security threat. And for that, the Moon administration is putting a strong accent on the culture of the defense forces, and is aiming to increase the civilian control of the MOD and to reinforce the expertise of civilian personnel, and of course to come back on the capability that are required from the aerocar and forces in wartime operational time, and of course is also emphasizing the use of scientific and technological advancements. And the last element is, of course, to attract the support of the public opinion for them to accept this evolution of and this modernization of the aerocar military forces. I'm going maybe to jump to my next slide, and maybe to focus for my last minutes on the turbulence and the transformation within the alliance between South Korea and US. And you had on the slide 4 major issues that was under a very heated debate between the two partners. That is to say, the burden sharing issue and an increasing participation of aerocar to the cost of the deployment on its territory of the US forces in Korea. The question of the strategic autonomy, no need to emphasize the question of the transfer of the operational control in the hand of the South Korean militaries. Of course, the credibility and the long-standing commitment to the US military, and the question of the potential reduction of the US presence in South Korea, and also the future of the alliance, and the quest for more equality, for more autonomy on the side of South Korea, and maybe the perspective for the alliance from going from a regional to a global perspective. And this is really very interesting because, of course, what we see in this perspective, this is a legacy of the Donald Trump administration with a view that finally the alliance wasn't very valuable. And of course, there was this America First policy and the growing competition with China, with a kind of a skeptical view on the value of the alliance. And of course, Trump has very often described US allies as taking advantage of the United States and describes them as being a free rider. and complain very often about the fact that they would not come to the aid of the American in case of crisis. And of course, if the alliance show a certain level of resilience, the fact is that President Trump's strategic unpredictability and a request of significant increase of payment, threat of withdrawal of the US forces from the South Korea, a threat of abrogation of security commitment, rise a certain level of anxiety among the political and military circle in South Korea. And just a figure, according to the Pew Research Center, the level of confidence of people in South Korea for Trump in 2020 was at 17% compared to 80% for the President Obama in 2016. And of course, there are actually growing doubt among the South Korea political and military civilian circle about the ongoing credibility of the US commitment. But of course, with the election of Joe Biden, maybe this could help to ease the tendency to the American first policy influence within the US government. And maybe this could help to bring a fresh focus to a more cooperative settlement of the burden sharing and the alliance management issue. But of course, it is possible to imagine greater turbulence between the two partners because of the management of the US and North Korea issue, and that could make difficult the task of President Moon to have a coordinating policy and a coordinate policy toward North Korea of the South Korean administration. To finish, a quick view on my last slide, where I invite Kurt Campbell. Sorry, maybe difficult for me to have access on. Okay, and just to echo some comments about the potential arrival of Kurt Campbell and its maybe incoming designation has in a new post ASEAN XAR for the Biden administration in Asia. And I refer to one of the last articles signed in Foreign Affairs by Kurt Campbell, which can give some indication on the orientation of the new Biden administration toward the Indo-Pacific. And of course, there is a view in this article that in fact there is a kind of parallel between the great power rivalry or research of balance after the Napoleon War, and the balance of power concept in the legacy of Metternich policy, and the need for US to find a new and to give more legitimacy to a new balance order in the Indo-Pacific, where the main allies of America would find a new role. So I will stop there because I think I took too much of my time with my difficulty with the sharing of the screen, and I thank you for your patience, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Marianne. We will have 10 minutes extra time for a Q&A session and plenty of time to listen to our next speaker, Théo Clément, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the EHESS in Paris, where he belongs to the Korea Center Studies, as well as an adjunct lecturer at the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology is a dual PhD holder. His research deals with Chinese economic engagement and economic reform in North Korea. Dr. Clément, his research is rooted in long field research stays at the China DPRK border, as well as in Pyongyang. Théo, you're currently speaking from Mauritania today. We are very eager to listen to your presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time to take a Q&A session and to discuss your points with both Mr. Ambassador and Marianne Péron-Doise here in Paris. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Mrs. Quessard. I hope everybody is hearing me well, because I'm indeed speaking from Mauritania, where my internet connection might not be as good as the one you have in France. It's very humbling to speak after distinguished speakers such as Ambassador Takamizawa and after Marianne Péron-Doise, of course. The topic I'm going to address is actually quite closely connected to what Marianne just explained. But incoming members of the Biden administration, what we can read from the nominations with regard to my specific topic of expertise, which is the DPRK. So I'm going to start with rewind back to November, when we all understood with relief, I think, that the Trump administration era was over and that we would see a little bit more of what I'm going to call normalcy in terms of handling for the US foreign policy. But us, our very close, very small, community, not close, but very small community of North Korean experts were a bit worried that with Biden in power, he might be tempted to undo what I interpret at least as one of the few good things that Donald Trump did in terms of foreign policy, which is not denuclearizing the DPRK, because that's still something that needs to be done. And that's definitely going to be an important challenge for the Biden administration. Although, if we look at the polls, it's not necessarily the topic that worries the American population that much. I mean, not as much as the rise of China, for example. So it might not be the most important issue that the Biden administration is going to deal with. But what Trump did good in terms of North Korean policy was basically admitting that the issue was not the North Korean nuclear weapons in themselves, but the relationship between the US and the DPRK, and that North Korean nuclearization was more of a symptom of that lopsided and very difficult relationship. And he was also clever enough to recognize that the issue of North Korean nuclearization and the issue of US DPRK relationship could only be solved by diplomacy, which is in sharp contrast to what happened during the Obama years. And during the Obama years, obviously, Joe Biden was Vice President of the United States and was involved in the design of the US foreign policy towards the DPRK. And I think this is all the more worrying to see people like Biden come back to power with on the very specific of the DPRK issue, given the strong signals that have been sent by the North Koreans over the last few weeks, over the last few days, actually, in the run of the 8th Party Congress, of the 8th Congress of the Korea Workers' Party, where basically Kim Jong-un, after completely closing the border with China, after completely refusing to engage in all kind of trade because of the almost proverbial North Korean paranoia when it comes to pandemic. Basically, what the North Koreans have been doing over the last year is to go even beyond the scope of the sanctions regime, not only trying to prevent certain goods from entering the country, but actually sealing airtight the border with China, and basically refusing to engage in all trade with foreign actors. And even if the DPRK economy is most likely facing extremely difficult conditions right now, we still have seen Kim Jong-un making a 9-hour-long speech in which he explains that the North Koreans are going to continue nuclearizing, developing their workforce, and asking for a very long list of extremely sensitive military hardware, including nuclear-powered and most likely nuclear-capable submarines, which is going to be a huge challenge for international security, going to be a huge challenge for Japan, of course, but and for the non-proliferation apparatus as well, of course. So basically, I don't know if the North Koreans are going to be able to muddle through and actually go through with their long Christmas list. But the thing is that the signal is here. No matter how hard we try to punish the DPRK, no matter how hard we try to sanction them, no matter how hard we try to isolate them, even in self-imposed total isolation, they are signaling that they are going to that they want to move forward the way they decided. I mean, in a sense, what they are signaling is that they won't budge, even no matter how hard we try. And that's a very worrying sign. I mean, if the Biden administration is not keen on developing ties, I mean, maybe not ties, but developing diplomacy and developing a foreign policy that is more inclined towards dialogue or at least negotiations with the DPRK, is definitely going to become an even bigger issue than it is right now. And on that part, we've got mixed signal from the Biden administration. Obviously, it's not very rigorous exact science to try to read what the future of the Biden administration policy towards North Korea is going to be based on the profiles and based on the nominations of the people at the Secretary of State or at the CIA. But we still can see some signals. Some of them are really worrying. Some of them are really positive. So I'm gonna stop short of interpreting that too much, but just explain that when we learn, for instance, that our colleague from former CIA analyst, and I think right now she's working at the RAND Corporation, but I might be mistaken. So Mrs. Jung-H Park, the author of Becoming Kim Jong-un, who tends to have very hardcore conservative stance on the DPRK, and to have this idea that the North Koreans tend to be, I don't want to put words in the mouth, but in a way deceptive and cheating, and in a way evil, in the very US sense of the term, like people this very mean North Korea that is trying to actually absolutely attack the US, or trying to compete with the US in a military sense of the term. That was definitely a sign that worried the community of analysts working on the DPRK. The nomination of Anthony Blinken, for instance, or at the Secretary as Secretary of State, and more recently the nomination of William Burns as the head of the CIA, was also something that did not really worry about in terms of aggressiveness or harshness towards the DPRK, or at least refusal to enter a dialogue. But Blinken, for instance, and Burns have advocated solving the North Korean nuclear crisis by basically duplicating what has been done on Iran with the DPRK, which might seem as a good idea because there were progresses on the issue of Iran. But when we look at I'm clearly not an Iran expert, but if we look at the way of the situations of the Iranian nuclear weapons program and the North Korean nuclear weapons program, we are talking about two different things, and we are talking also about two different countries. Iran cannot withstand economic pressure as much as the DPRK. The DPRK is a very resilient economy, and the DPRK has been isolated for more than 70 years from basically international trade networks, which is not the case of Iran. Iran is an oil producer, which is not the case of the DPRK. And most importantly, North Korea has nuclear weapons. It's not about preventing them from getting them. They have nuclear weapons. We know they work. They are doing H-bombs, and they are trying to, and we have mixed intelligence that they're actually able to make them small enough to fit on ICBMs and to actually be delivered to the US, which is not the case of Iran. The Iranian nuclear program can be stopped the issue of the North Korean nuclear program is, can it be reversed, which is a totally different issue. We're not talking about counter-proliferation anymore. But we also see some more, what I interpret at least as some more positive signal from the Biden administration. And I'm very keen on seeing how the elite, the policy elite in DC is going to move forward with all these different species. And I'm talking specifically about the nomination of Wendy Sherman as Deputy Secretary of State. Because Mrs. Sherman was the head of the North Korean policy coordination unit at the White House, if I'm not mistaken, during the Clinton administration, and she was one of the architects of the agreed framework of the CADO agreement, which was the only workable deal that has been signed by the U.S. I mean, concrete workable deal that has been signed by the U.S. and the DPRK. It failed for many reasons, including because of the North Koreans who cheated on the agreements, but also because the U.S. side did not deliver what it signed on. So I'm hoping that she will be one of the voices being heard by the top leadership in the U.S. and that this will be a way to move forward on the specific crisis of the DPRK. And I'm going to stop there so we still have time for Q&A. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Théo, for your presentation. Very interesting to hear from the good things or the bad and good signals of the Biden administration to come, but also the better relationship that perhaps the Trump administration, and perhaps Mike Pompeo as well, that you not mentioned in your presentation, but I'm sure that it was just behind the scenes when you talked about reinforcing a good relation between the two countries. I would have loved to hear a little bit more about that, about the last month of Pompeo at the head of Department of State and trying to keep relations with DPRK. Perhaps if you have time to come back to it during the Q&A session. So I just don't want to I just want to leave the floor to the audience because I'm sure that we have some questions, and then we could come back perhaps to a question that Ambassador you would have for both Marianne Péron-Doise and Théo, if you want to react, and obviously Marianne and Théo, I'm sure that you would have questions as well for one another. So first, perhaps do we have questions from the audience? We don't have one on screen, so perhaps Théo, you could. I was very interesting as well on your comparison between obviously DPRK and Iran, and that was particularly certainly relevant for our audience. That remind us that Iran and DPRK are not in the same. Are not resilient in the same way, or that DPRK would be more resilient to any pressure from the US, obviously, and still the fact that the US would reopen some negotiation with Iran may be also perhaps interpreted as a good signal for the relation with DPRK, because if I try to reverse the point of view that you mentioned, when Trump withdrawn from the JCPOA, this was also a bad signal sent to Asian partners as well. So I leave the floor to that for you to answer, and then Ambassador, if you want to join and step in and perhaps ask questions for both Marianne and Théo. Théo, go ahead.
Well, I can't really explain too much on the JCPOA because it's clearly not my area of expertise. But when we realized that the Trump administration would withdraw from the agreement, I became worried because I thought about, okay, how is it going to be interpreted in Pyongyang? How are people in the North Korean military, in the North Korean political elite going to interpret that signal? And there is no better gift to the North Korean conservative, and I'm thinking about maybe the general in the army, people who are this revenge mindset against the US, people who want to actually not be more involved with the US and who believe that the US cannot be trusted. There is no better gift than actually withdrawing from the JCPOA, because that's a very strong argument for them to say, you see, we cannot deal with the US. These people cannot be trusted. They cheated on us on the Quito agreement. They did not implement what they promised to do with Iran. And that was not only a huge step back for peace and for on the Iranian program, but it was also a very, very bad signal that was sent to the North Koreans as well. And I mean, if we see Kim Jong-un, I mean, the leader of the DPRK, as someone who's trying to navigate an environment where he's actually trying to develop the economy, where he's actually trying to unisolate the DPRK to make it more connected to international trade networks. If we see him that way, he still has to deal with domestic pressure. Might not be a strong one, but it still has to deal with the legacy and the way institutions in the DPRK are shaped. And he definitely cannot do anything without the backing of the army. So, including people who are very strongly against the US and against caving to US pressure. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. If I may, I have one very short question for Ambassador Takamizawa. From your perspective of a high-level civil servant, what would you expect from the Biden administration when it comes to US policy towards the DPRK?
Ambassador.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. And first, let me talk about the difference between the Iran and the deal and the DPRK. And certainly, I think there are a lot of similarities, but the fundamental difference is that the Iran agreed to stop, I think, the programs, and at least, and also the process was quite transparent. And France, UK, Germany, and so forth. So they actively participated in the negotiation. But in case of the current development between the DPRK and US at the very not so transparent and top level and discussion and so forth. So I think there is a fundamental difference. Also, we haven't been able to stop the North Korean nuclear program and missile program. So this is a clear difference. So we have to create some new way that can be really make a difference and so forth. So I think Biden administration has a lot of potentiality to facilitate and to integrate various powers and elements in a very creative way. So I understand that President Biden is really good at coordination and the Congress measures and so forth. So I hope that US can be in a position to listen to really good ideas and to integrate in a specific policy. And the power to integrate, not just balance of power. I think that Kurt Campbell, I think, talked about after the 9/11 that power to integrate, power of balance, not balance of power. Power balance is much more important. What is really needed, I think, for the coming days. And with regard to the policy toward DPRK, I think DPRK is pretty in a difficult positions, and also their announcement of the party Congress is pretty harsh. So it's time, I think, for international community, I think, to take a creative approach to the DPRK. So that's my impression. And with regard to the burden sharing issues and so forth, and in Korea and Japan and others, I think that Japan and ROK needs to work closely together, at least in the security areas. But current political difficulty has hampered us from cooperating. But I hope that the military to military or defense to defense, I think discussion should be managed in a way that can integrate positive elements for one specific purpose, that is international stability and cooperation. So I think that's what I like to point out. And if I may, that with regard to the free and open Indo-Pacific, I think France and Japan has a lot of potential to integrate. So let's compare the projects underway and which aspect you can do and which aspect we can do. So I think this kind of integration would be possible and feasible and very meaningful. So, and through FOIP cooperation, we can jointly assess the situation and also what is a priority we can talk about. So I think that's important. So if we are united to propose some common, I think, proposal to US, this is the area that you should focus on and focus. Maybe G7 and other process can be utilized for this purpose. And yeah, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We do have two questions from the audience. The first one was about the role of Pompeo's last trip cancelled in Europe and the impact on East Asia, but we partly answer or tackle that issue. The second one is about the main difference between the Biden administration and the Obama administration regarding the US foreign policy towards North Korea, and if I may say so, perhaps towards other and toward partners in the region. So first, the question was for Clément, and we may listen then to Marianne Péron-Doise and also to Ambassador Takamizawa, please. So Théo first, would you take that question?
So on the difference between the Biden administration and the Obama administration, well, I sure hope the policies are going to be different. I think Trump, in a way, made a gift because he broke a taboo, which is speaking to a dictator, speaking to someone who is seen as one of the most brutal dictators in the world. And that, in a way, is a gift, if I may, because Joe Biden won't have to break that taboo himself or the very high-level people of at the Secretary of State or other institution in the US, and that's actually going to make things easier because you won't have the stigma of talking to people like Jong-un. So I hope that it will enable the Biden administration to move forward from what has been done under Obama, which the so-called policy of strategic patience, which is basically waiting the problem to solve itself, using economic pressure and sanctions to coerce the DPRK into changing. It was never going to work to start with, from my perspective at least, and it's clearly not working. It's actually becoming very, very counterproductive because it radicalized the North Koreans, and it kind of proved them that there's nothing to be expected from the outside world. So I hope that with Trump, with his very specific and also very counterproductive diplomatic style, it actually enabled following US administration to engage into more active and more direct diplomacy with the DPRK.
Okay, thank you very much. Marianne, I'm sure you would have, what is your take on the difference between Obama and Biden administration as regards South Korea, perhaps?
Well, for South Korea, I will introduce, if I may, the Chinese factor, because we didn't talk about the Chinese factor, but globally speaking, we had in mind the strategic competition, and when we are speaking about the concept of balance of power, which tend to be reintroduced in the Indo-Pacific policy of the new US administration. This has to be with China and how to define relation and stable relation, or to integrate this new ASEAN order. Because clearly speaking, I had the impression that Biden administration is considering the global scene and the Indo-Pacific as quite chaotic after the Trump administration, and wanted to reorganize a regional order based on the alliance, based on a kind of new legitimacy. And this new legitimacy mean to have convergence on not only North Korea, but the definition of an acceptable China policy. And clearly in this perspective, I can't feel that South Korea could have quite reticence we saw that with the deployment of the missile defense and the deployment of the THAAD, you see the US-led missile defense system, which aim is to shut down ballistic missiles. And of course, if the regional picture is focused on North Korea and the nuclear threat and the ballistic threat of North Korea, clearly a more enlarged picture has to deal with China, the China nuclear policy, China modernization of its high-tech arsenal, and this expansion of the military, economic, and political influence of China. And so I think that for the Moon administration, and Moon is in the last year of this 5 years mandate, so I do not know who is going to succeed. Maybe we will see a more liberal oriented or conservative new president coming. I'm not sure of that. And we know that depending on the orientation of the president of South Korea, the impact on the alliance and the closeness and the alignment, I put that into bracket, with the US objective are quite different. But I think that more than the North Korea files, the China definition of a global and concerted and coordination policy is going to be at the core of the fresh view or the new impulse that the new administration is expecting from his partner. And speaking of the Indo-Pacific, we had a new discussion and the re-emergence of the operationalization of the Quad, and maybe the enlargement of the Quad with the Quad Plus, for example, integrated apart from India, Japan, US, and Australia, maybe South Korea, maybe other partner. So I think that we need to focus more on the orientation and the new relation between China and US, and what are the direction of this very tense and competitive relation that we are going to observe, because I think that this could be a determinant for the restoration of the new legitimate order, and what is the Joe Biden administration could have in mind to reinvest this space, to repivot to Asia with more credibility and more legitimacy. And clearly there is a need to have more coordination and to integrate more common vision. And actually, I have the feeling that there are very divergent strategic vision between the main actors, Japan, South Korea, regarding the US policy toward China.
Okay, thank you very much, Marianne. Obviously, there's as Ambassador Takamizawa mentioned first in his presentation, there's a great number of elements of a continuity, but also breakthrough, as if we think about the main challenges ahead for the Biden administration. First, this harsh competition with China and the needs for the US to come back into the game and to be more and perhaps to favor economic integration in the regions, because now obviously it's China who has taken the lead recently and not the US anymore. The so-called pivot to Asia under the Obama administration, or rebalancing, has been completely certainly has come to an end with the end of the TPP, and we are particularly aware of that. It's going to be difficult and a real challenge for the Biden administration to come back to agreement on economic integration in particular, plus as Ambassador Takamizawa underlines as well, among the new challenges, and that would make a difference between the Biden and the Obama administration, we have all what is going on in the gray zone and obviously cyber threats. And the US certainly military and cybercom is particularly aware of that. And if the US wants to propose and favor a strong military support to its allies in the region, it has to do with not only nuclear deterrence, but also with preventing from cyber attacks and preventing partners from attacks in the gray zone, if I may say so. So Ambassador Takamizawa, and then we will have to conclude certainly this very interesting roundtable and session. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And with regard to the question of China, I think China seems to be thinking of kind of independent capability, their own supply chain and so forth. So even if Joe Biden has kind of taken a soft approach or integrated approach, but China seems to be determined to counter a kind of some possible offensive operations against China. So we have to live with this fact. And that means that diplomacy and capacity building and enhancement of our integration and coherent policy, I think will be really needed for the future. So soft and hard and hybrid type of things will be needed on a sustainable basis. And with regard to the final point, that I believe that Biden administration has a great potential if allies and partners are active and willing to propose and compromise if needed to various policy requirements. I think that's the most important thing for us to work at. And then there are a lot of room for Europe and Asia to work with. And if we are united and if we come up with a common agenda, that will certainly help both Europe and Asia to engage US in a very positive manner. Yep. Thank you. I think, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your time. Thank you for your answers. And we all keep in mind that we have to work for a common agenda between European and Asian allies to engage the US. And it seems that US observers are particularly aware of this requirement as well. So thank you very much, Théo Clément from Mauritania. Thank you, Marianne Péron-Doise. Thank you again, Ambassador, for your time. We have to close this roundtable session, and we hope that we'll be able to pursue those very interesting discussions in the months to come, because obviously we will have other elements to discuss the new Biden administration agenda and the resilience of US alliances both in Asia and in Europe. Many thanks to all of you. Many thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you indeed. Thank you. Bye-bye.